All right. So first, I want to thank everyone for coming out to this presentation. Additionally, thanks to ESA for putting on these around-the-clock meetings. My name is Jonathan Oxley. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the economics department at Florida State University, and I'm a job market candidate this year. My main research interests are in behavioral and public economics, and this is my experimental chapter of my dissertation. This paper was really motivated by a couple of different seemingly contradictory statistics. And let me get that advanced. There we go. So first off, roughly 75% of all charitable contributions in the United States go to religiously affiliated organizations. Donations to religious charities are made up by a couple of different factors. There's direct religious giving, which makes up roughly 31 to 32% of all giving in the US. That is your donations to churches, mosques, synagogues, etc., like your weekly offerings at churches. Additionally, the rest of the donations towards religiously affiliated organizations go to charities that are either educational in nature, relief in nature, etc. A different type of organization that got its 501c3 status for a different reason, but does happen to be aligned with a religious faith. Of these organizations, 22% of all religiously affiliated charities and 45% of religious relief and development charities do not report a religious affiliation in their description on their Form 990. If you're not familiar with this, every year a charity must file a Form 990 with the IRS, and on the Form 990, directly on the front page, is a short paragraph description of what the organization is and what it does. And so these statistics seem to be somewhat contradictory to me, and it brought me to my research question as to whether or not religiously affiliated charities have a financial incentive to selectively display their religious affiliation. This is a relatively large question that's papered over several smaller questions. First, how much does religious belief translate into selecting a charity? How does that belief translate into charitable contributions? Does a lack of religious affiliation drive donor preference towards secular charities? And are donor responses consistent with charities affiliated with a religious outgroup within the region? This would be something that would be rather difficult to find exogenous variation for a natural experiment, and would also require me partnering with a charitable organization and randomly changing its religious affiliation emphasis in their fundraising materials if I was going to try to run it as a field experiment. That would mess with fundraising dollars, so it seemed rather unlikely. So that left me with essentially no other option to answer these questions but to run a laboratory experiment. And so that's what I did. The literature on religious affiliation and charitable giving, depending upon which angle you're looking at, is either very vast or very small. Starting with donations on organizations, organizational religious affiliation, the literature here is relatively small, with Chin et al. Being the main economics paper from 2017, demonstrating that joining a team on a microfinancing site, kiva.org, increased lending, and the most popular teams were either outwardly Christian or outwardly atheist. This more or less is the donation literature towards religiously affiliated organizations in economics, and so I'm hoping to contribute to this literature as this literature is relatively limited at the moment. The donation patterns of religiously affiliated individuals literature, though, is very vast. Religious affiliation is a positive indicator for higher charitable donations in field data. This was summarized from a variety of different studies in Becker's and Wipking's review of the literature in 2011. Furthermore, in field data, religious charitable giving has been shown to be highly income inelastic. This behavior pattern does not necessarily extend to the lab, though, as religious and secular individuals donate at similar frequencies and amounts in the lab. One of the first papers that looked on it was actually Catherine Eccles' paper, who happens to be in the session as well. Thus, my paper was looking to contribute to the literature in examining donor patterns on strength of religiosity, which I elicit through a survey at the end of the experiment, not just affiliation alone. As a quick preview of what my results were, and looking at competitions for donors between Christian and secular charities, I find that adding religious language to a charity description does not impact donations on either the extensive margin, and what I mean by that is donation frequency, or the intensive margin, average donation size, for Christian charities. Affiliation alone did not impact magnitude of donation or frequency. However, strength of religiosity is positively related with larger average donations. Secular individuals donate towards Christian charities less frequently. However, those that do donate to Christian charities have higher average overall donations. Comparing between Christian and Islamic charities, here's where I actually find evidence that religious organizations have financial incentive to selectively display their religious affiliation, as I find that adding religious language reduces donations to Christian charities previously with their affiliation information omitted. This impact is both the intensive and the extensive margins. This kind of surprised me. I honestly expected the findings to be the reverse and have it be on Islamic charities, but that's why we run the experiments. Furthermore, I find that individuals with a higher strength of religiosity donate at higher rates. However, I do not see any differences along the intensive margins. Put together, I find that charity and donor preferences are mismatched. Charities do find that aligning with a religion is helpful. This is because of a variety of different in-network reasons. However, to motivate it, I like to compare it to fundraising. Whenever you have a charity that is affiliated with a church, they are able to use the church occasionally for special offerings. Whether the congregation size is 10 or 10,000, that is a significantly lower fundraising cost towards the organization. As many third-party watching organizations such as Charity Navigator, Charity Watch, and GuideStar look directly at fundraising costs as a measure of charity effectiveness, it's very easy to see why having these offerings would be helpful for the charities. When you factor in network effects, it makes sense why charities would find aligning with a religion helpful. However, my results are indicating that the full donor pool prefers no affiliation, or at least the appearance of no affiliation. Thus, charities have tremendous incentive to selectively display their religious affiliation in certain competitive circumstances. I can let you know that anecdotally, based off of the fundraising mailers that I've received from the charities that I used in this experiment, this selective display of religious affiliation is already happening. So now that I've discussed what my results, a brief preview of what my results are, let's discuss how the experiment was actually ran. I used a 3-phase experiment, with phase 1 being my main difference driver across treatments. Phase 1 is where subjects will select one charity from a menu of 8 options, which varies in the composition of charities and charity religious affiliation. This is what drives and makes up my differences in treatments. I have first intra-religious competition, which I define as a competition for donors within the subsector of religiously affiliated charities among religious charities aligned with differing faiths. Next, I have extra-religious competition, which is a competition for donors between religious charities and secular charities. Within intra-religious and extra-religious competition, I have masked sessions and unmasked sessions, where masked sessions are defined as competition with 4 charities having their religious affiliation information omitted, and unmasked sessions are competition with religious affiliation information easily identifiable for all the charities in the experiment. I will give a detailed breakdown as to which charities are always masked, which charities are always unmasked, which charities are sometimes masked, sometimes unmasked, which ones are used in extra-religious competition, and which ones are used in intra-religious competition on the next slide. However, as a broad overview, I have a 2x2 between subjects design, varying masked sessions and unmasked sessions, and intra-religious competition as well as extra-religious competition. So looking at the charity menu by a composition type, I have 4 Christian charities used in my experiment throughout the experiment. This was specifically chosen as Christianity is the majority cultural religion in the American Southeast. The experiment was ran in Tallahassee, Florida, and so I was going with that particular cultural majority. 2 charities are always unmasked regardless of the session being a masked session or an unmasked session. In this case, for Christian charities, it's World Vision and World Hope International. So that means that their affiliation information is always available in the charity description on the menu, and regardless of session. Conversely, Opportunity International and World Concern, in masked sessions, they have their affiliation information omitted. In unmasked sessions, they have it clearly identifiable. I will give examples of each unmasked and masked on the next slide. So for intra-religious competition, I use 4 Islamic charities. Islamic Aid and Islamic Relief USA, not surprisingly by the name, are always unmasked. Life for Relief and Development and Mercy USA are masked with their affiliation information omitted in masked sessions and unmasked, and so clearly identifiable in unmasked sessions. For extra religious competition, I substitute out the 4 Islamic charities for 4 secular charities, first using SHARE through the Center for Inquiry and Direct Relief International, which are always unmasked. And then I have Oxfam and Mercy Corps, which has their affiliation information omitted in masked sessions and available in unmasked sessions. The placement of the charity on the menu screen is randomly determined before each session and randomized each session. So as a quick example of what I mean by variance, World Hope International is a always unmasked charity, and you can tell by reading through the charity description, through the highlighted part, that it is clearly a Christian relief and development charity. Conversely, I have Opportunity International. For masked sessions, the description looks like this, where you cannot tell what religious affiliation, if it has one, that the charity has. Conversely, unmasked sessions, again with the highlighted portion, it's clearly a Christian charity. And so that's what I mean by varying the composition of the description of the charity. Let me check time really quick. Okay. So my charity selection criteria are on the following criteria. First, I use international relief organizations. The relief organization choice was due to the fact that this was 45% of all Christian, or excuse me, religiously affiliated charities, not including that information in their Form 990. Additionally, I wanted international benefits so that the beneficiaries were not necessarily local effects that the subjects might know. Similar in quality ratings, based outside the states of Florida, again, trying to avoid location effects. I used Islamic charities to give a definitive religious outgroup for the region, with a large number of relief and development charities in operation. I also looked for a balance and emphasis along religion based off the website description and fundraising materials. Note that all descriptions were created using language included in the charity's website and fundraising materials. I do not put any language in any charity's mouth. All right. So phase 2 and phase 3 remain consistent throughout the experiment. Phase 2 is a real effort task. Subjects have 10 minutes to correctly count the number of zeros on as many 10 by 10 matrices as they can solve. They earn $2.50 per correctly counted table, with an earnings cap set at $10 to avoid income effects. I intentionally wanted this task to be done relatively easily so that I would have similar comparisons for donation amounts so I could convert them into percentages. Additionally, subjects who do not reach maximum earnings were dropped from my analysis. After the task is complete, subjects are then allowed to make their donation decision, and they are informed that they can make no donation if they would so choose. From there, we move into a demographic survey. This is fairly standard questions in terms of racial and ethnic background, subject age, subject gender identity, as well as college major. Additionally, I ask them questions on how familiar they are with the charities used in the experiment, religious affiliation information, and construct a measure of religiosity strength. For that, I use the Duke University Religion Index, which is a 5 to 27 point scale. 5 being least religious, 27 being most religious. That's based off of the answers to the following questions. 1, how often do you attend church or other religious meetings? How often do you spend in private religious activities? In your life, do you experience the presence of the divine? Are your religious beliefs what lie behind your entire life approach? And do you carry your religion into all other dealings? So as a quick plot of the raw data, let me explain how to read these charts first before explaining what they say. The y-axis in this case is going to look at percentage change from the treatment and control groups on the extensive margin. So this is donation frequency. Left hand 4 charities are going to be those from extra religious competition. Right hand 4 are from intra-religious competition. I have the blue charities are secular charities. Red are Christian charities in extra religious competition. Orange are Christian charities in intra-religious competition. Green are Islamic charities. The darker and solid filled shapes are those charities that did not experience any change in their description through unmasking. And the lighter colors with hollow shapes are those that did experience a change in colors or change in description through unmasking. And so those are the explicitly treated charities. And what I find is that I don't see any difference in donation frequency for charities in extra religious competition within the raw data. However, I do see roughly a 11% decrease in the raw data for Christian charities that had their religious information added after unmasking in the raw data. This is the only statistically significant effect that I have, and the error bars are 90% confidence intervals. So that was the extensive margin. Turning to the intensive margin, and I see, okay, 5 minutes, got it. I see increases for donations for secular charities and extra religious competition, and a decrease of roughly a $2 drop for charities in intra-religious competition in the raw data. To analyze this further, I use a hurdle model with a probit selection model and a Tobit model analyzing donations after individuals had selected in. Starting again with inter-religious competition, I find that unmasking decreases donor likelihood after using demographic controls by about 14.5%. Furthermore, higher strength of religiosity increases likelihood of donation by about 3%. Turning to the Tobit model for average donation changes, again, unmasking decreases donations to Christian charities by about $3.72. Let's move on. So looking at extra religious competition, I don't find any impact of unmasking on likelihood of donation. However, the Duke score is consistently correlated with higher likelihood in donating to Christian charities and lower donations to secular charities. Again, looking at the Tobit model for donation amounts, unmasking is not impacting average donation size, and secular individuals who donate to religious charities as a whole decrease at larger amounts. This does not extend to the unmasked charities, though. As such, I find financial evidence that financial incentive exists for religious charities to selectively display their religious affiliation. This is particularly true in situations of intra-religious competition where they're competing with other religious charities. Based off of the fundraising mailers I've received from the charities listed in this experiment, the charities are already aware of this fact. So while this experiment was ran from the perspective of the charities, this is the information that the donors need to know. I'm able to identify if incentives are changed by religious donors substituting out direct religious giving. If you can imagine that if an individual is donating less to a church but wants to still give to a Christian organization, or is donating less to a synagogue but still wants to give to a Jewish organization, that could change the incentives for donating or for displaying your religious affiliation, specifically in competing with other religious charities. Furthermore, I find that strength of religiosity predicts donation likelihood and average donation better than donor affiliation alone. The results here build on a literature showing a lack of difference in donation patterns by religiously affiliated and non-affiliated individuals in the lab. I would like to confirm this through a lab in the field type setting, but I'm hopeful that this could potentially help explain some of the differences in why, and the field data showing higher likelihoods of donation from religious individuals and lower likelihood from less religious individuals, and seeing no difference in the lab. Furthermore, I find that strength of religiosity is a strong predictor for donor likelihood and interreligious competition, and is correlated with higher donations in extra religious competition. Finally, I cannot identify if affiliation is the driving factor or primary driving factor in a donation decision. What I mean by this is that when people are looking at, in my experiment, at the donation menu, I can't decide, or I cannot tell based off of the data whether or not they are choosing the charities that they like, and then from that sub list choosing based off of the religious affiliation that most reflects their religious affiliation, or if they're separating by their religious affiliation first and then making a choice on the charities. Because I just have the one decision point, I can't tell what that driver is. Ideally, I'd also like to answer that question in a future lab in the field setting. All right, with my last minute. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. My name is Jonathan Oxley. I am a behavioral and a public economist. I'm a 2020 job market candidate from Florida State University. I'll be applying to economics jobs, public policy jobs, and public administration jobs this cycle. If I don't get feedback, if you'd like to give me feedback and don't have time today, my email is joxley@fsu.edu and my website is jdoxley.com. I'd be more than happy to talk with you after the session or in Q&A. And with that, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Now let's open for questions.
Yeah, Catherine?
I have a question. Yeah. There's several studies. I'm thinking of, especially of the ones by Linda Thunstrom at Wyoming, showing that religious and non-religious people react really differently. Now, her context is quite different from yours, of course, but religious and non-religious people react quite differently to her treatments, her experimental treatments.
Yeah, that was the thoughts and prayers one, right?
Yeah, there's several of those now.
That's fair. I was thinking of what she was presenting last year at SEA, I think.
So my question is, this all went by kind of fast, of course, it's a short presentation, but wouldn't you expect in your setting for that kind of interaction to also be quite important?
It's possible.
Yeah, you haven't tested for it, right?
Yeah, I designed this experiment and ran the data before I read her papers. So otherwise, it
seems like religious signaling that an organization is religious. That is, assuming people don't know it already.
Yes.
Signaling that it's religious should have opposite effects on religious and non-religious people.
One would think, yeah, it would. You would imagine that. In that particular setting, that's something that I actually kind of do get out of specifically in the extra religious competition treatment, looking at strength of religiosity. I do find that there is positive correlation in donating to religious affiliated organizations for higher scoring people on the Duke University Index and lower scoring likelihood of donating to secular organizations for those who are scoring higher on a Duke University Religion Index. And so you do kind of get opposite reactions in terms of once this organization has shown that it is a religious organization, and people will sort accordingly.
So you could probably build that into your statistical models.
Yeah, I can definitely look for a way to do that.
Using interaction effects.
Yeah, I can look on that. We'll have to abandon the hurdle model for that, just because at that point, looking at probit selection models and the Tobit model, the interaction effect's not going to be well understood, but I could definitely look into that just by running
but you got Peter Moffat. You got Peter Moffat in your session there. He can help you fix that.
Fair enough. So, thank you.
So just along those same lines, in addition to people maybe not knowing that the organization was Christian and interacting with that, it is also possible that extremely religious people are already donating, and so that knowing if they didn't know the organization was Christian, there might be some crowding out. Once they found out it's Christian, I'm already giving my 10%, so I don't have to worry about giving to this Christian organization anymore. So it could go the other direction too for some people.
And I did mention a little bit of that towards the end of, I'm not sure how the substitution effect is going to end up impacting with adding in direct religious organization. It's hard for me to have that since that's not that outside option doesn't exist in this particular lab environment, but it's something that I'd like to actually test further. And I can't really imagine doing that without having a lab in the field study, unless I suppose that there is a way to do donations to a church offering or something along those lines in the lab. But at that point, you'd almost be wanting to look directly specifically at religious individuals. So that would be an interesting way of looking, or that would be something that would be worth looking further into, because I agree with you. I think that there is something going on there with substituting between direct and indirect religious giving, and I'm not sure what direction that effect would end up being.
Okay. Hey, Jonathan, along the lines of Linda's work on the welfare effects of thought prayers, I think you can also say something, at least on the conclusion, because this is pretty important. If I am giving to a donation and that donation is religious, but I'm not religious, you are giving me a lot by telling me this is religious. So there is some welfare to be gained there, just on making things more clear for everyone. I don't know if you have data, but at least in the conclusion, you can say something about it.
Yeah, I can definitely look into. So I'm sorry, could you repeat that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I just mean that if I am giving to an organization and I don't know they are religious, but I am not religious, once you tell me they are religious, I'd be happy not giving them money. And in Linda's work, it seems that people are willing to pay, not to pay the money, actually. I'm kind of
Yeah, that's a good
extrapolating a
point.
little bit.
That could definitely be worth. That's definitely worth bringing up in the discussion conclusion. I'm not sure how much I can test for it, but it's definitely worth explaining further. So thank you.
Okay. So we have like 20 seconds, perhaps one last question, or we can just move on. Okay, let's move.
Thank you all so much.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Now we have Nishita Sina. I'm sorry, I'm probably not pronouncing your name correctly, so I'm sorry, but the floor is yours.
Okay, is my screen visible?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nishita Sinha. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Ag Econ at Texas A&M University. Today, I'm going to talk about our paper on giving motivations under cause marketing. This is a joint work with Drs. Marco Palma and Richard Woodward at Texas A&M. On this slide, I have pictures of consumer goods, the likes of which we have all seen in supermarkets. All of these goods have associations with some or the other cause. This association is often called cause marketing. Now, this association has the potential to increase charitable giving, although it's often used to increase sales and loyalty of consumer goods. Our focus in this paper is to look at the charitable giving aspect of cause marketing. So the question we ask in a sense is, does cause marketing increase total donations? In order to answer that, we try to understand the giving motivations, because whether or not total donations increase depends critically on what is the underlying motivations to give for donors. So the two dominant motives, as we know, are altruism and warm glow. Those referred to as pure altruists care about the total donations. So it doesn't matter if they give or somebody else gives, but their utility increases as long as the total donations increase. On the other end of the motive spectrum is our pure warm glow donors, who only get utility from their private giving. So they derive utility from the act of giving, and they do not respond to changes in third-party donations as long as it does not impact their own budget set. While both of these models lie at the poles of the motive spectrum, what's more consistent with the evidence in the lab is the impure altruism model, which says that people care both about total donations as well as how much they donate themselves. The problem with the existing model in understanding the question that we are looking at is that they mostly pertain to exogenous changes in third-party donations. They do not engage an endogenous donation such as what we see in cause marketing. Donations under cause marketing accrue when consumers purchase a consumer good. So we extend the existing economic models of charitable giving to account for these kind of endogenous donations, and then test the resulting model predictions using a lab experiment. Here, I briefly explain our model under cause marketing. So the consumer is now maximizing same total utility that's a function of a private good and total donations. But the total donations here is now equal to my direct donations, which is GID. So it's the first red expression that I am referring to here. So my direct donations plus gamma times X. Gamma is the donation per unit of good X that is sold. So that is the total donation that a pure altruist is concerned over in the cause marketing setting. With a quick manipulation, we get at the budget constraint that's shown in equation 2, where we see that the price minus gamma jumble up in an expression, and that gives us a clear hypothesis to test for pure altruism. So as long as the increase in donations that accrue via cause marketing is matched by an increase in price, and that is an equivalent amount, a pure altruist would not change the total amount of donation he or she desires. And as a result, we will see complete crowding out. So the private donations will decrease dollar for dollar, for an increase in third-party donations that accrues via cause marketing. Now, there's another interesting thing that I want you all to attend to under cause marketing. So third-party donations, as I already said, accrue endogenously under cause marketing setting. So while there was only one channel of crowd out in the extant models, which was altruism, here we can refer to two different channels. The first is the usual altruism channel, so total donations increase, individuals lower their donations. The second is the warm glow channel. Because donations accrue when I purchase a consumer good, I might want to consider that as part of my donation, and already might get either total warm glow or part of warm glow from that, and hence reduce my direct donations in response to that cause marketing donations. So here, the crowding out is going to take place via the warm glow channel. In order to accommodate for warm glow from both my direct donations and indirect donations, we come up with this more general impure altruism model given by equation 3, where we attach weights to different kinds of donations. So GID is my direct donation, and GIX is the donation that accrues via cause marketing. And both of these have different weights attached to it, alpha D and alpha X. Now again, note that as long as alpha D equals alpha X, such that I derive equal amount of warm glow from either type of donations, I'll completely crowd out any third-party donation that even accrues via cause marketing. Now note that here, crowding out is not taking place via the altruism channel, but there is still complete crowding out. Based off of that model, here we have all donor types. So those donors who get more utility from their donations via cause marketing are referred to as indulgent altruist in our paper. Those who get equal utility from both types of donations are indifferent altruists, and those who care more about their direct donations, we refer to them as benevolent altruists. So interesting thing to note in this table is that pure altruism, complete crowding out is no more a sufficient condition for pure altruism. It can occur as long as alpha X equals alpha D, which could be either for an impure altruist or just for warm glow individuals who care about their own donations, but their own total donations, and regard their cause marketing donations as much as their own as their direct donations. In order to understand the crowding out that takes place under cause marketing, this is our experimental design. So all participants make 9 allocation decisions in our experiment. This is a within subject design. They allocate their endowment between buying tokens for themselves and donating to one poor cocoa farmer from Ecuador. Now tokens here are proxies for a consumer good. We say that every time you buy a token, a foundation, that's our donor partner, donates 25 cents or whatever amount, that amount varies through the task. This donation, we tell them, will help the farmers in buying farm inputs, and that will in turn help them increase cocoa productivity. So participants make donation decisions throughout our experiment for varying level of third-party contributions. This is another partner that we have in our experiment. So all farmers that our participants donate to in our experiment are associated with Makita Foundation in Ecuador. We also provide the screenshot to the participants. This has the contact number, the web address of this foundation that makes it more salient for them. And we also have some more pictures that I don't show here, but we show them pictures of farmers working in the farms, having meetings, selling cocoa, and all of that. So we have varying amount of donations from a third-party foundation, and this third-party foundation donates both endogenously, which is via tokens, and exogenously, which is how we have in our usual crowding out tests. Each participant in our experiment is paired with a different recipient or a farmer. So every participant donates to one single farmer. This helps us mirror our utility function, our economic model. Participants' earning in our experiment is equal to the number of tokens that they buy. So again, this is like X in the utility function. So this is their private good, and their earnings equal to the number of tokens they buy. Participants' donation is, participants' direct donation to the farmer is equal to the number of experimental currency units that they donate. We choose one decision out of the 9 to determine the payment of our participants. This is the decision screen. It's a slider task. They indicate how much of the experimental currency units they want to spend on buying tokens. And below that, they can see the consequence of their decision on their own earnings, their direct donation to the farmer, how much donation accrues via token purchase, total donations, everything. So it just moves, everything moves according to the number that they put using the slider. Now, I want to focus on two different elements of our design. So the first question that we want to answer is, do subjects derive warm glow from donations via cause marketing? And the second is identifying the channel of crowding out. If crowding out is taking place, what is leading to the crowding out? Is it altruism or is it warm glow from cause marketing? So in order to answer the first question, if participants indeed derive warm glow from token purchase, we adopt Grossman and Crumpler's direct test of warm glow. So here we have the donation amount that's going to the farmer fixed at $20. So in the first setting, we have while donations fixed at $20, they can give whatever they want, and the balance is compensated through token purchases. Okay. So, and analogous to that, we have the exogenous donation, which is the exact replica of Grossman and Crumpler, which is donations are fixed at $20, and whatever they don't give is given by our third-party foundation. So basically, we compare how much direct donation is given in the endogenous setting, where the balance is compensated through cause marketing, and to the direct donation that's given in exogenous setting, where the balance is simply directly compensated by our third-party donor. Now, the second question that we want to look at is, what is the channel of crowding out? In order to do that, we compare the extent of crowding out in the exogenous setting with the endogenous setting. So in the exogenous setting is our baseline. If we conclude in the exogenous setting that preferences are consistent with impure altruism, such that crowding out is not complete, and we are not able to say that preferences are consistent with pure altruism. However, we are able to find complete crowding out in the cause marketing or endogenous setting, then we say that the crowding out is taking place via the warm glow channel. Because if it were taking place via the altruism channel, it would also take place in the exogenous setting. And we design our experiment in a way that third-party donation matches between the exogenous and endogenous settings. And hence, we are able to compare their preferences one-to-one in both the settings. Here are some preliminary results from our experiment. We call it preliminary because we were not able to complete our experiment before COVID hit us. So we are planning to complete it in the next few weeks. As of now, a total of 66 undergraduate students participated in our experiment. We had more number of female participants than male. About 15% of all participants in our experiment gave 0 across all tasks. There were 3 who gave everything, except in the last 2 decisions, which is where donations are fixed at 20, regardless of how much they give. These 2 tasks also had the most number of participants at the lower corner, understandably. But we did have a small difference. So 83% gave away 0 in the endogenous task, which is when the balance was compensated via token purchases. Whereas 71% gave 0 in the exogenous task, where the third party was compensating directly for any differences between 20 and their direct donation. These are our preliminary results about preferences. We are currently refraining from showing you any regressions because we don't have the number of participants we would want. So, but broadly, we are able to reject pure altruism in both endogenous and exogenous settings. We are also able to reject pure warm glow models under both endogenous and exogenous settings. Now, in order to explore the differences in warm glow from either types of donations, we estimate a heterogeneous agent model based on the utility function that I showed you earlier. and find that about 15% of all participants do derive warm glow utility from donations via cause marketing. However, almost all of them uniformly derive more warm glow from their direct donations. So the warm glow derived from cause marketing is higher than warm glow derived from direct donations only for a negligible proportion of our sample. And this kind of indicates that our participants are mostly benevolent altruists. And we also find that total donations to the farmers increase um, in our experiment. So here are some implications and where we are going forward from here. So obviously we find that participants value their direct donations more. Total donations will increase when supplemented by cause marketing is an implication of what we find. And we see there are no surprises because obviously we are seeing growing partnerships between charities and different corporations. So going forward, we want to collect more data. We are also talking about including community members because they are the ones who often face economic decisions such as these, where they either make donations on their own or have to make purchases of consumer goods that are associated with some or the other charity. Then we also have process data that we collected that we haven't analyzed as yet. We have eye tracking data, which will help us further explore what kind of information our participants attending mostly to and how that's impacting their the decisions that we are finally seeing. That is all. Thank you very much. If you have a paper that I need to cite, please feel free to send either to me or to Dr. Palma. And I'm ready to take your questions if you have. Thank you.
I have a question if nobody else does.
Okay.
So when I think about cause marketing, I think about it as a decision that a firm is making.
Mm-hmm.
So a firm makes a decision whether to do cause marketing with its product or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that your experiment doesn't quite answer, but maybe could,
Mm-hmm.
is whether the firm should do that.
Okay.
So what are the advantages to a firm of cause marketing? The firm must the firm care about the cause for it to be worthwhile to do that? And does it increase demand for the firm's good?
Yeah. That's we have thought about looking into that, but the problem with that is we would need to have another consumer good that's not associated with cause marketing in order to see if people are more attracted towards a consumer good that's associated with a cause. But there are also concerns that when I was looking into this literature in the marketing area, I found that people are really brand focused and they might not usually shift from one brand to another if another brand offers cause marketing, but unless they are really similar, that might not happen. So
Yet firms do this, so there must be some reason that firms do it.
yes, and what I meant to say was that the demand does increase, but it's mostly from the consumers who were already purchasing it in more quantities. So for example, Starbucks that usually does this around Christmas to raise some money has more people coming into their coffee shops, or same people buying more of their coffees or bringing some guests because they know that now it's going to a particular charity. But those who don't go to Starbucks anyway, even though it's now associated with a charity.
I think more simply, I mean, there are several papers that have already looked at that and how demand shifts and respond to those in the ag econ literature. So that's what we are trying to answer a different question.
Yeah, I mean, the papers that we looked at has not focused on the charitable giving aspect of cause marketing. And those that have had, their models are not consistent with the economic models of charitable giving that we have for pure altruism and more.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions?
Well, then we can move to Peter's presentation. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hey, Peter, you are muted.
Maybe I was just not saying anything. Okay. What's the time?
You have the 20 minutes.
Is it time to start though?
Yep.
Okay, I'll start. Thanks for being at my presentation. This paper is co-authored with Graciela Zabalas-Poles, who I think is in the audience, and we're both at the University of East Anglia. And it's about behavior in dictator games. And we are, I think for the first time, we're applying this, the concept of the Kuhn-Tucker model to behavior in dictator games. The focus is on giving tasks versus taking tasks. And obviously there's a big literature on this already. An important part of this literature is due to Bardsley and List and others who established that if you start off with a dictator game that involves giving a positive amount or giving zero, and you extend the choice set to allow taking as well, then that extension of the choice set has a negative effect on giving. That was the result that was discovered by those authors. But there's another way of looking at the taking treatment. And if you just look at it as a framing effect, then it's actually the opposite. You actually see something that appears to be the opposite. Framing the task as a taking task has a positive effect on amount transferred. That is, if you've got a dictator game task and you design the identical task, the same task as a taking task, then the amount transferred increases. So that may appear to be a contradiction. These may appear to contradict each other, but they don't actually contradict each other. But this is just an illustration of, you know, maybe the taking treatment is more complicated than it first seemed. The effect of the taking treatment, that is. Now, what we're doing is we're interested in a structural model. That is, we're interested in estimating the parameters of a utility function whose arguments are own payoff and others payoff. Now, this has been done a lot before. A significant contribution was Andreoni and Miller. That was Econometrica 2002. Estimating the parameters of a utility function using data from what's called a modified dictator game. That is, the data is obtained from an experiment in which the endowment, not only is the endowment varied, but the price of giving and the price of keeping are also varied. The central question that we're asking in this paper is, how do the parameters of this utility function change between giving and taking tasks? So we can call this a structural treatment test, because we're not just looking at the data and asking for, you know, what's the difference in the means between two treatments. We are looking at the parameters, the structural parameters, and asking how these structural parameters change between the two treatments. The experimental design looks like this. So I just mentioned Andreoni and Miller. This is similar similar to their experiment. And this experiment is due to my co-author, Graciela. This experiment was done as part of her PhD a few years ago. And there are 18 tasks. All the subjects face all 18 of the tasks. Half of the tasks are giving tasks and the other half are taking tasks. Now, when we say giving task, we mean the subject, the subject can give a positive amount or they can give 0. They can't do anything else. When we talk about a taking task, we mean the subject can take a positive amount from the recipient or take 0. They can't do anything else. So tasks are either giving or taking. They're not both. No tasks are both. And the dictator's endowment varies between tasks. The recipient's endowment varies. The price of self-allocation varies, and the price of other allocation varies as well. So that's the experimental design. What's the actual procedure? We have 138 subjects who are randomly assigned to between dictator and recipient. So we've got 69 dictators. Each dictator faced the 18 tasks that I just showed. The order of the task was randomized between individuals. After all decisions are completed, each dictator was randomly matched with a recipient. One of the dictator's decisions was chosen at random and paid out. That's the procedure. And the notation we use in the theoretical model is this. We have M1 for own endowment, that's the dictator's endowment, M2 recipient's endowment. X1 is the amount received by self or dictator, the amount received by the dictator. X2 is the amount received by the recipient. And obviously the utility function is a function of these two arguments. The utility U of X1, X2 is the utility function. P1 is the price per unit of X1, P2 is price of X2. For example, if P1 equals 2, the dictator receives half a unit for each unit the dictator directs to self. So that's a bit like income taxation at 50%. If the price of X1 is greater than 1, that's like income taxation. Another example, if P2 is a half, this is the price of giving. If the price of giving is a half, then other receives 2 for each the unit the dictator directs to other. So this is a bit like a situation where you give to charity and an organization matches the amount you have given. That's an example of a situation where the price of giving is less than 1. P1x1 is the amount directed to self. P2x2 is the amount directed to other. So we've got x1 and x2, which are the arguments of the utility function. The variables on which decisions are actually being made are these, P1x1, P2x2. Now in a consumer demand model, the analogs are quantities consumed of two goods. P1x, these are the analogs of expenditure, expenditure on the two goods. So as I say, these are the decision variables. These are the arguments of the utility function. Okay, now we're going to assume a Stone-Geary utility function. Stone-Geary utility function is of this form. We have A parameters and B parameters. The B parameters, B1, has an important interpretation. B1 is the amount of money that the dictator considers to be rightfully theirs. It's, if you like, it's their minimum acceptable payoff. A dictator has a certain amount of money in mind when they start the experiment, and that's B1. So the dictator's payoff has to be higher than B1. So think of that as a subsistence level. In consumer theory, we call it a subsistence level for good one. It's the subsistence level for own payoff. A1 also has an interpretation. It's a different form. So B1 is a form of selfishness. A1 is another form of selfishness. Once the dictator's subsistence needs have been met, that is, once they've received their B1, they make another decision, which is of the remaining endowment, what proportion am I willing to give to the other, and what proportion do I want to keep for myself? The proportion they want to keep for themselves of the remaining endowment is A1. That's the interpretation of the A parameters. Now, we need normalizations. The A parameters, because they're proportions, they add up to 1. The B parameters actually add up to 0. I say this is a normalization. It's not really a normalization. It's an identifying restriction. When we say the B parameters add up to 0, obviously we're saying that one of them, if one of them's positive, the other one has to be negative. Well, the subsistence level for own payoff is probably going to be positive. The subsistence level for the other player's payoff would then have to be negative. Now, what does that mean? If a subsistence level is negative, it may be hard to interpret, but it's very important, because the subsistence level has to be negative for the indifference curve to cross axes and for us to get what we call corner solutions. So I'm going to get onto that. One more thing is the budget constraint. The total amount you spend on the two people, yourself and other, must be less than the total endowment, less than or equal to the total endowment. Okay, now, this is, I want to explain where the Kuhn-Tucker concept comes in. Here's an example of a giving task. It's a giving task in which the initial endowment is 6/6. So the dictator gets 6 and the recipient gets 6 to start with. And the dictator's task is to decide how much they want to give to the recipient. So they're going to end up somewhere on this line. Now we can think of it as the feasible region being this triangle. The feasible region isn't really a triangle. In a dictator game, it's a line, but given an increasing utility function, it doesn't actually make any difference whether we say it's a line or a triangle. Saying it's a triangle is nice because then it brings the analysis into alignment with introductory microeconomics. Does everyone remember studying budget lines, budget sets, and indifference curves? That's what we have here. This is the indifference map that we have when the parameters are B1 equals 1 and A1 equals a quarter. This is the indifference map. Here we have what we call an interior solution. That means we have positive giving, because the initial endowment's here. The chosen endowment by the dictator involves them receiving less than 6 and their recipient receiving more than 6. So that's an interior solution. Well, if we increase the parameter B1, then we're shifting the indifference map to the right, and we have what we call a corner solution. Now, the corner solution is really important, because the corner solution is what you need to explain zero giving. Okay? Zero giving is what you see in dictator games. Most of the modal observation in dictator game experiments is zero giving. So we need corner solutions to explain zero giving. That's why the Kuhn-Tucker framework is very important in dictator games. This is a giving game. If it's a taking game, what do we have? If it's a taking game, then the triangle's on the other side, because this is the initial endowment, 6/6, and the dictator has to decide how much am I going to take from the recipient. In other words, how far along here do I want to go? How much do I want to take away from them and give to myself? So where on this line do I want to be? Well, again, if the indifference map is here with a B1 equals 1, then we have a corner solution that's zero taking. And if we push the whole indifference map over to the right with a B1 of 5, then we have an interior solution that is positive taking. If we move it further to the right, I don't have another graph, but it would be nice. If we had another graph that gave us a corner solution here, then we would have maximal taking. That is, if the dictator takes the whole of the recipient's endowment, and that sometimes happens. Okay, constrained optimization problem. We're maximizing this utility function subject to a budget constraint and non-negativity constraints. This is the constraint that we have in a giving task. And we obtain Kuhn-Tucker conditions. If the amount that you keep for yourself is 0, then we have an inequality, that the B1, the selfishness parameter, is less than this quantity. If in a giving task, the amount you keep for yourself is your whole endowment, that is, you give 0, then your selfishness parameter is greater than a different quantity. And if we have an interior solution, then we have an equality involving B1. So notice this, if we're at a corner solution, we've got an inequality of our parameter. And if we're at an interior solution, we have an equality. So the econometric model I'm building up to is a bit like the two-limit Tobit model that is quite well known. For a taking task, everything's the same, except where for a giving task, the non-negativity constraint looked like that. The amount you keep for yourself has to be between 0 and your own endowment. For a taking task, the non-negativity constraint is that, it's not really non-negativity, but the constraint that goes there is that the amount you keep for yourself must be between your own endowment and the sum of your endowment and the other's endowment. The Kuhn-Tucker conditions look similar. They're different, but they look similar. Now, we assume the self-allocation subsistence level varies between tasks. And it varies between tasks with a mean, a baseline, which is subject specific. This is the important term because this tells us whether selfishness is different in taking tasks from in giving tasks. This is a dummy variable indicating whether it's a taking task. We also allow selfishness to depend on the task number. Now, when you have this sort of model, you talk about regimes of behavior. There are 3 regimes. In regime 1, people are the least selfish. They're keeping, in a giving task, they're giving everything away. In a taking task, they're taking 0. In regime 3, regime 3 is the most selfish. In a giving task, they keep everything for themselves. B1 x1 equals m, keep everything for themselves. And the regime in the middle is the interior solution. So what I want to do here is just introduce the idea that there are 3 regimes of behavior. If we define this quantity Z, then the per observation conditional likely contributions look like this. This is a standard normal distribution. That's the symbol for standard normal distribution there and there. And this is the standard normal density. So if it's regime 1, we have a probability. If it's regime 3, we have a probability. Those are the corner solutions. If it's the middle regime, then we have a density. So as I said, two-limit Tobit. It's like the two-limit Tobit model, but it's not because it's a, it's a structural model. We can't estimate this model with the Tobit command in Stata. We need some programming. And then we can combine the likelihood terms using the dummy variables, and then the conditional log likelihood for an individual we obtain by taking the product of observations for a given individual. We assume between subject heterogeneity in selfishness. And then having done that, we get a likelihood contribution, which is an integral. To evaluate the integral, we use Halton draws by the now well-known method of maximum simulated likelihood. And the sample log likelihood is here. This is what we maximize to get estimates of these parameters. In the data, we have 69 dictators, each facing 9 giving tasks and 9 taking tasks. And this table just gives an idea of the numbers of decisions in each regime. So look at regime 1. This is the least selfish regime. In giving tasks, there's only one observation. The whole experiment, there is only one observation. There's only one case of a dictator giving their whole endowment to the recipient. It's only one of those. In giving tasks, there's the most common outcome is the most selfish, that is give 0. In taking tasks, there's a more even spread. In taking tasks, the most common outcome again is take everything, but there are quite a lot of observations with take nothing. So that's a table which shows the data. This is a diagram which shows the same data. On these graphs, we're plotting amount received by other on the vertical against amount received by self on the horizontal. And we're doing that separately for giving tasks and taking tasks. Now for giving tasks, obviously, there's a lower bound to the amount received by other, because other has an endowment. And the endowment is often 6, but not always 6. So that's why there's a lot of observations. And by the way, this is a jittered scatter plot. Jittered so that you can see how many points there are. When you see something like that, it just means there are a lot of points. So there are a lot of points on amount received by other equals 6. And that's because the dictator's giving 0. In taking tasks, there are a lot of observations with amount received by other x2 equals 0. Well, that means that the dictator has taken everything. Now, an important point here is that if you just look at these two graphs and compare the data, if you do simple tests on this data, you will find that dictators are more selfish in taking tasks. That is, if you just compare the means of amount received by self, you'll find it's higher for taking tasks than for giving tasks. If you compare the means for amount received by other between giving and taking tasks, you'll find it's lower for taking tasks. In other words, it appears that dictators are more selfish in taking tasks. However, that's obvious. It's obvious. It's a consequence of the design. That's one of the reasons why it's important to use a structural test here, to estimate the utility function and ask how the utility function changes between these two tasks. Here are the results. Mu and eta are the mean and the standard deviation of the parameter that we're allowing to vary across the population. And obviously, it's quite high, the mean's quite high, but the variance is quite high as well, indicating there's a lot of heterogeneity. The parameter we're most interested in is beta take. And this is negative and it's strongly significant. And it basically just says that when it's a taking treatment, the whole indifference map shifts to the left by 1.64. In other words, dictators are less selfish under taking tasks, ceteris paribus. The A1 parameter, this is the other selfishness parameter. This is not significantly different from 0.5. Now that's an interesting result because it basically says that once the dictator has met their subsistence requirements, and they're asking the question, how much of the remainder am I willing to give to the other person, then they are egalitarians. Once they've got the amount that they came for, then they become egalitarians and they're willing to split the remainder of the pie 50-50. Now, when we estimate these models, we always get posterior estimates of the thing that we're allowing to vary across the population.
Peter, we're not out of time, so if you can kind of wrap it up.
We're out of time, are we?
Yeah.
Okay, I better go to the conclusions.
Yeah.
This is the conclusion. Our theoretical model assigns positive probability to corner solutions. This is important because Nash behavior is at a corner solution. Either zero giving or maximal taking is a corner solution. The Stone-Geary utility function is useful because indifference curves cross axes. Indifference curves crossing axes is what gives us the corner solutions that we need. There's wide heterogeneity in selfishness. The other selfish parameter is about 0.5, and that means egalitarianism once basic needs are met. This is, I think, a new result. It's a way of looking, putting a better light on dictators. But the key conclusion is this: selfishness significantly lower in taking tasks. The interpretation of that estimate that I reported earlier is dictators are prepared to settle for £1.65 less when the task is a taking task. And this is to allay the cold prickle of taking. Now, I believe this term comes from Andreoni. For many years, we've talked about the warm glow of giving. Well, the opposite of warm glow is cold prickle. Now, there seems to be an asymmetry here because the cold prickle is worse. Cold prickle of taking is worse than the negative, negative of the warm glow of giving. So there's an asymmetry there which we are uncovering in this model. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, if someone has any questions, just ask.
If no one has any questions, it would be fun to see those posterior distributions. Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
Yes, this is the subsistence level for each individual. Think of it like that. For each individual, we have a posterior estimate of subsistence level, and it's usually positive. Very rarely is it negative. That's what we expect, but there's a lot of heterogeneity. There's a big cluster up at the top. Now, the cluster up at the top is obviously the Nash subjects. They are the subjects who take the maximum, who give 0 and take the maximum every time. They're Nash subjects. If you take them out, then you get a different set of estimates, but you get the same key result. And if you do the posterior probabilities, obviously we've got rid of this group, and the remainder becomes more compact, and it becomes closer to the normal distribution, which is what we want. So I think excluding the Nash subjects was a useful robustness check.
So one question. I don't know if it's important, but how do you think about these people with the negative subsistence level?
Well, the answer is there aren't many of them. I mean, what have we got? We've got 69 dictators, and maybe four out of 69 have negative subsistence levels, meaning they don't, you know, if they come to the experiment and they don't really mind if they end up with 0. I mean, I think they get a show-up fee or a participation fee, which is separate. Oh, I'm not sure about that. We'd have to check with my co-author. I'm not
basically
sure if
people who don't engage.
Really 0.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Very interesting, Peter. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'm gonna present now. So I'm gonna move into mine. All right. Well, thank you for coming and for staying until the last one. My name is Tabaré Capitan. I'm a PhD student at Wyoming now. And this paper, it's currently titled, "A Simple Nudge May Increase Giving Among Those Who Hide Behind a Small Cake." But I don't love this title, so please let me know if you have better time at presenting this work. So any feedback is going to be very, very useful. Instead of going through the standard kind of experiment, I'll first tell a very simple story that tells it all. And then I'll go into the details of what we do. Our story has 2 characters, siblings Diana and Raj. Then it unfolds on Diana's birthday, which is a day in which she gets this giant cake from her parents. It's just for you because it's your birthday. And what we're gonna talk about is, will Diana share her cake with Raj? As you can see, the parallels for a dictator game are right there. To explore this question, we're gonna think on a counterfactual world. In this world, Diana got the cake in the living room and she was right next to Raj. So they both see the cake, they both know the size of the cake, and more importantly, Diana knows that Raj can see the size of the cake. So in this world, Diana decides to give 40%. This 40% probably represents a lot of things. Diana likes her brother. She wants the brother to eat some cake. She also would like to eat that cake because it looks really good, but she might feel guilty if she just eats the whole cake or just gives a really tiny piece to Raj. So that's what we have in this world. Now let's think on a separate world. In this world, Diana receives the same big cake, but right now Raj is outside, most likely playing basketball. So Diana starts thinking, well, I know Raj most likely will find out that I got a cake, but he doesn't really know what size of cake I got. And now she only gives him 20%. Why? Perhaps she really, really feels bad about giving nothing, but now she doesn't think that Raj is gonna be too sad because he doesn't really know how much of the cake he's getting. So she can give Raj a 20%, eat more, and don't feel as guilty, okay? Now, this idea that you can exploit information asymmetries to avoid guilt is often called the hiding behind the small cake effect. The idea is that here, Diana is exploiting that Raj doesn't really know what's the size of the cake, so she can do something that she wouldn't do usually because she's not gonna feel as bad knowing that Raj doesn't feel bad because he doesn't even know. In this paper, we find evidence of the existence of this effect. But the good news is that it is very unusual. very few people exploit the information asymmetry. These two results combined essentially replicate a result by Ockenfels and Werners in vivo, but we use a different experimental design and different participants. Now, our main contribution here is that those who hide behind a small cake are the most responsive to a simple nudge. And this simple nudge is very simple. Essentially, we're telling Diana, hey, you know, Raj helps to receive 45% of the cake, and she is going to be the most responsive among all the kind of people you could have. Now, that's what we do. Now, I'll tell you how we do it. We've run an online experiment on Amazon Mechanical Turk. We have 3 treatments, and the instructions are very standard for dictator games. So the common knowledge for all participants in all treatments is that the experiment will have 2 parts, and they will make 1 or 2 decisions in each stage. They will be assigned to either dictator or recipient, and then matched. And then, this is important, the dictator will receive an endowment that is either large or small. So everyone knows this. And finally, dictators will just share as much as they want. Our first treatment is a standard dictator game with complete information. Here is the money, and everyone gets the large endowment. They decide how much to give. But now we have a second stage where we tell them, the recipient doesn't know how much you gave, but he hopes to receive 45% of the endowment. And we tell the dictator, now you have the opportunity to revisit your choice. You can give the same, but you can revisit. And that's the end of the treatment 1. And now we have 2 treatments more. They all start the same way. Here is your endowment, and everyone gets the large endowment. But here, dictators get to send a message to the recipient. They can tell the recipient, I got the small endowment or I got the large endowment. So as you can see, there is an opportunity to lie here. They can essentially hide behind the small cake right here. But there's a catch. In treatment 2, they can lie, and it doesn't matter because the true endowment is not going to be revealed. But in treatment 3, they can lie here, but they know that at the very end, the true endowment is going to be revealed. So those are our 3 treatments: 1 standard dictator game, 1 modified dictator game with private line, and 1 dictator game with public line. After they send the message, they decide how much to give, and then everyone plays the same second stage. Now, what do we get? This is just the shared data, the raw data. As you can see, this is very standard of any dictator game, except very few ones. We always have bimodal distribution, peaks at 0 and 50%, and very few people give more than 50%. All our results are based on this data. Our first result is that the hiding effect, the hiding behind the small cake effect is really not too important. Like, yes, it exists, but it's not too important on aggregate. To see that, first, let's see how many people lie. 22% in the private line and 21% in the public line. So it's not that many people. And here I want to stop to say one thing that is very important. We don't really understand what happens with the people in treatment 3. These people, they lie, and they know that everyone will know that they lied. This is a public lie. Our experiment really focuses on the treatment 2, and treatment 1 and 3 are used as benchmarks. So we're not too worried that we don't understand their behavior, but it's clear to us that some more complex reasoning is going on. Now, okay. So few people lie. And if we see here, we have the empirical cumulative distribution of giving by those who lie, the gray line, and then the ones that don't lie, and the ones in treatment 1 as a benchmark. What we can see is that, yes, those who lie give way less, and more importantly, they are much more likely to give 0, but that's 20%. The other 80%, their giving looks essentially like the giving in the first treatment. And because of that, on average, the distributions look very similar across all treatment. So yeah, this is a problem. Potentially it's a problem, it exists, but it doesn't seem to be too important. And here, notice that we are working on an online environment where people, I guess, care less. People might care more if they are classmates or if they are actually Raj and Diana when they are brothers. But here, this is the extreme. I don't care at all about you. I don't know who you are. I don't know what country you are. I know nothing about you. So that's our first result. Our second result is most participants do not change their giving after the message. We tell them he expects 45%, but they don't care. And this graph that you can see here is on the left, you have the histogram of the first split. At the bottom, you see the histogram of the second split. And then you have a scatter plot. The 45-degree line represents the people who just don't change their split. And as you can see, most people don't do it. The scatter plot is a little tricky because you have to jitter and stuff. But once you see the histograms, you can see the mass of the distribution is really over the 45-degree line, which means that most people will not revise their choice. And our main result, the most important in the novel contribution, is that among those few who actually respond to the message, liars are the most responsive. And to see that, here we plot the empirical cumulative distribution of the difference between split 2 and split 1 by type of dictator. So what you can see is that the vertical line at 0, that shows the share of participants who don't revise their choice. And because the distribution of those who lie is to the right, that means that they are most responsive, they are increasing their giving much more than anyone else. And that's why here we're a little conflicted because result 1 is saying the hiding behind the small cake is not a big deal. So we shouldn't care that much about it. And here we're saying, well, if it's a big deal, if it's not a big deal, why do we care that you're kind of fixing it, right? But then we think that we are using on online experiments. And if we go back to our original example, say Raj and Diana, they probably care about each other much more. So this effect might be more important. But anyways, that's our main result. I'll just summarize our results again. Most participants do not exploit information asymmetries in dictator games to give less. Most participants do not revise their giving after receiving a message with the expectation of the recipient. But those who respond are precisely those who exploit information asymmetries. Thank you very much. And before you leave, I'm on the job market. I do research on applied macroeconomics. This is not my job market. My job market paper is called Expecting to Get It and the Nominal Effect for Information. And my fields are behavioral economics, experimental economics, environmental and resource economics. If you are looking for a nice, fun colleague who can do some research, please check out my website and get in contact. Thank you. Any questions?
I think that I missed something in your experimental design. So this is a within subjects design?
Well, there are two parts. These results are between subjects. We're comparing a subject who were in treatment 1 to a treatment 2. And then here, we're comparing the same person first split against the second split.
I'm sorry, could you just say that sentence again? Here we compare what?
Yeah. Okay, so it's between design in the sense that we compare people in treatment 1 against people in treatment 2, and those are different people. But then for some tests, we have within design, when we compare the same person in treatment 2, the split 1 against the split 2. So we have both.
What did you say you learned from the scatter plot that you just showed us?
What you learn is that most people don't respond to the message.
Should it be the 45-degree line? What do we expect to see here?
Yeah, almost everyone is in the 45-degree line, which means that they did not change their split. Say, for example, someone on the first quadrant under the line, right? That means on the first split, for example, they gave 20%. And now if they are to the right of the line, in the second split, they gave more than 20%.
Right, but you're telling us that on average, people are on the 45-degree line.
Ish.
Yeah.
Why don't you do a regression?
I haven't done regression so far. I'm kind of working with just kind of visual approach. But what do you think I can learn from an extra regression, or do you have anything in mind?
Well, you do a regression of the vertical variable against the horizontal. You test the hypothesis, the joint hypothesis, that the intercept is 0 and the slope is 1, because that tests the hypothesis that you're on the 45-degree line on average.
Oh yeah, no. I do have tests. I don't have regression, but I have a statistical test, and I actually go through your book because I don't want to just rely on the t-test for dictator distributions. But I do show using multiple statistical tests that the difference is significant. That's also an artifact that this is a within design, so you get a lot more power. So the differences are small, but they are statistically significant for many tests.
Okay, thanks.
Well, the other way to do it would be to do a panel with 2 decisions per participant and have on the right-hand side the variable for the second time they do it. What they do after the message and test for whether that's significant.
Okay, yeah.
Because it looks like most of your dots are below the 45-degree line, actually.
Yeah, well, the 45-degree was chosen on purpose because we wanted to have people in both sides, so we can have an estimate. But I like this idea because we have a few covariates, so we can get a bit more precision by that. Okay.
I don't know. I think that when you do stuff online, it's really important to make them pause and answer questions, and so that you make sure that they're paying attention to what you're giving them to do. It's too easy to just blast through these things and not pay any attention. I don't know if you saw George Lowenstein's keynote address earlier today, but the stakes are low, you know, and people's attention is limited and they just want to get through. And so I think that tends to bias online experiments towards null effects, especially within subject design.
Yeah, one thing to say is that we actually checked how much people take an experiment, and everyone who was unreasonable, they're out. So we're just keeping the ones who seem that they took the time, but we'll never really know if they actually pay attention. So that's something.
Well, you can tell by their completion time. You can tell by how fast they do it.
Yeah, no, the ones who were unreasonable, and those are very, very few, they are not on this data.
Mm-hmm.